Welcome to Cada Lunch and Learn. Thank you for joining us for a 30-minute lunch debate. We have two speakers today, Dan and Sarah.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Just a little bit of housekeeping. We'll all be muted to avoid any background noise, and I would encourage all of you to put your questions into the chat, and we'll run through them a little later. Today, we're going to discuss the future of luxury. Not to say we have all the answers, because, well, these days, who has any answers? But in May, we looked at the likely impact of inflation on shoppers, operators, and suppliers. So today, we'll discuss the challenges posed by the current economic climate to the luxury sector. How can luxury brands respond during an inflationary period? And what do consumers of luxury goods and services want? Have these desires changed? I'll hand over to Dan and Sarah. They can shed some light on this for us.
Thanks, Meha, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. I think on the surface of it, it's a really difficult time for a luxury brand because almost by definition, luxury is the opposite of necessary. It feels like something you can opt in and out of. It feels like something that, is very much discretionary. And that's from a consumer's point of view. And from a luxury brand point of view, the whole idea of conspicuous consumption at a time when the news headlines are dominated by people who can't afford ordinary everyday necessities is a tricky tightrope to walk. And if you look at the brands that we often talk about, the grocery sector, the language of inflationary periods actually plays quite well to their strength because they can talk about price drops and price locks and commitment to low price and commitment to value and all that sort of thing, which is really the exact opposite of what a luxury brand would seem to offer. Having said that, a lot of luxury is about products that last, it's about longevity, so it's about looking at value in a different way. So I think actually, and the other thing about luxury, of course, is that a lot of their marketing budgets are geared up towards talking to their customers, conversations with customers, how they can interact with and engage their customers beyond pure driving them to product purchases. So I think conspicuous consumption is something to be very careful of. But I'm just anecdotally, just at the weekend, I was telling you, Dan and Meha, we took my mum out for a birthday treat. It was her 70th. We went to the Berkeley Hotel, and the place was very busy, and it was full of people, mainly, I would say, tourists rather than locals. And there was a lot of conspicuous consumption going on. There were a lot of people walking around with a lot of bags from local luxury stores, and there didn't seem to be any sort of shyness or reticence that I observed. So that's just my take from from one outing at the weekend. But Dan, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I think we've been talking about this for a couple of weeks, and I think we're seeing a mixed picture in terms of data from different markets and different sectors. So we were looking earlier on in the year, and we were seeing that the luxury goods market in China is really struggling. But we know that China's got particular issues with continuing COVID restrictions, but we'd seen there's been a big drop in the value of watch sales and handbag sales, which are a good indication of the market overall. And again, I suppose we come back to what happened in 2020 with COVID generally or globally, was that was the biggest single year fall for luxury sales ever. But most retailers were closed for most of the year unless they were essential. So it's not surprising, and we know that there was a lot of money was saved, or a lot of money wasn't spent. So maybe that money was deferred into 21, where in fact 2021 was a better year for luxury than 2019 was, despite there still being a lot of restrictions, not as restricted as 2020, but it managed to recover and have a small gain. And fortunately for this session, Bain and Altagamma have just released their 21st annual luxury survey yesterday, and they're suggesting that there'll be a 21% growth by the end of this year, although there is a caveat in there that Q4 2022 is uncertain because of the current economic situation. However, what we're seeing is that obviously there's strong growth, even if it doesn't hit that 20% plus year end, there's still going to be strong growth in the sector in 2022. And they're also suggesting that growth continues into 2023, somewhere globally between 3 and 8%. That 3 to 8% is caveated by China's ongoing COVID restrictions being lifted, and Europe-wide and US resilience to recessionary pressures. So we don't know, but it is expected that the market will grow in 2023. And also in comparison with 28 and 29, where the last financial crash happened, sales are now in the luxury sector more concentrated among the ultra wealthy, with the top 2% now contributing to 40% of sales. And also counterintuitively, and I don't know where the data is for this, is that consumers, in contrast to 2008 and 9, are not ashamed or less reticent at showing off their purchases. So,
yeah, I mean, that's certainly, like I say, it's anecdotal, but that's certainly what I observed on Saturday at the Barclay. It's interesting what you say about the sales being more concentrated among a smaller group of people. Does that make it easier for luxury brands to look after those customers?
Well, I think
there aren't so many of them. So.
There's that, and I guess there's also, there's a whole world of kind of private sales as well. That's maybe less visible because not just sales by appointment in boutiques or department stores, but actually brands coming to those ultra high net worth people, bringing their products and bringing their collections and selling them there. But I do also think that outside of that particular bubble, which may create a greater resilience in the sector, you can still say 60% of luxury sales are now are still very broadly based, and a luxury buy for some people is not. There are many consumers where luxury is not the only part of the market they consume at, but a choice to trade up or to buy a particular purchase at that level.
Yeah. And is that where events and experiences can play a more important role, perhaps?
Well, I think so. I mean, if we think of experience, we could look at kind of holidays as being part, or travel as being part of experience broadly. We also can look at dining as being part of experience. Things that where the purchases or where the price is not connected totally to a product, but is connected to something that is service driven and that is pleasurable or beneficial. And I think that that's certainly the case. But also I see that we've talked about not the experience economy specifically on a whole webinar, but we've touched on it a lot throughout this year. That experience is obviously a very important part of persuading any sort of sale to take place in a physical space rather than it being an online transaction. So I think we can see that experience is an increasingly important part of the luxury makeup, and we see that there's sectors that are definitely projected to grow, include travel, include dining, and how experience can then augment those other retail sales within retail spaces.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about physical space and how that can be, how brands can use the physical space that they have to effectively to sell more product and to create those connections in a way that is different to what happens online. We were having a look at in preparation for today, we were having a look at what some of our clients are doing, and one of them is Fortnum & Mason, which is obviously a luxury heritage client, and they're running some really quite interesting events in the run up to Christmas. And a lot of them are focusing on getting customers to visit the store, to visit the Piccadilly store, which is obviously a store with a huge amount of heritage and a huge amount of history. And the expression "sweat your assets" is a bit crude, but they've got some really quite interesting events that are sold out. So there's a champagne masterclass that's happening in the Piccadilly boardroom, which is a space that, as an ordinary customer, you wouldn't usually, even as a luxury customer, actually, you wouldn't have access to that because that's where the business is run from. But for £65, you can join the champagne masterclass and taste some champagnes. Burberry is doing something quite similar by using it. They every Christmas they use their physical spaces for their top clients to give them this runway experience in the store, but for a very small audience. So again, make people feel appreciated, give them a reason to attend the store, to come to the store, to have an experience, not necessarily with a transaction at the end. Looking again at Fortnum's, they've also got some events that are non-chargeable. So it's not always about selling a ticket for something. They've got a weaving activation with one of the brands that they sell, Araminta Campbell, who creates all her hand-woven scarves up in an atelier in Scotland. So the team from that brand is going to be showing how these pieces are created. So it's all about the craft, and that's a huge area of focus for Fortnum's as a brand, because so much of what they make is, a lot of it's made in store, actually, as it happens, but also so much of what they sell is crafted, is made, is artisan made. And at the end of this activation evening, some hand woven pieces are going to be available for sale, for customers to buy if they choose to. They've got complimentary engraving with jewelry processes, with jewelry purchases. There's another trunk show with Champagne Le Canapé for £15 and with another jewelry designer. So it's also a nice opportunity for a really, quite a heavyweight luxury brand like Fortnum's to actually showcase some of these smaller designers who a Fortnum's customer might not be familiar with, but it gives them a platform, it gives them an introduction, and it shows where Fortnum's is at that sort of really interesting intersection of exciting, artisan, very high quality, premium luxury goods. But it's not necessarily about opulence or about sort of showing off. It's about craft and artisanship and expertise. And it has that opportunity to pick and choose who it wants to showcase and to give the value of that kind of curation and give that to customers.
And I think that's a really important part, to the personalization, experience, bespoke products. These are all things that have got a long history with luxury brands. Hermes started out as a saddle maker, making saddles to measure for the rider and the horse they were going to ride. We can go on and on. We know for saddle riding. Yeah, exactly. So that's one. It's true to the heritage of the brands, and two, it's also increasingly what people are looking for from luxury. It's not just the same product. No. There's still of course that I must have a particular bag or that season's shoe.
And it will say something about me if I have this bag rather than this bag, and it will only say something to a particular kind of audience, because the vast majority of people simply won't know the difference. But if you, it's a way, it's really, if you look at fashion in general, it's a way of communicating who you are. And if you're a person for whom that is important, then the purchases you have, if they're luxury ones, are saying something about you. And it might be that, let's look at the eco angle, for example.
Well, I think that's really interesting, because that ties two things together that I was thinking about, which is if you look at Anya Hindmarch, we've talked about several times this year in these webinars. Anya and her brand and her collection of village stores in Pont Street in London. There are 5 sites, effectively 3 on one side and Raven 2 opposite on the other. One of those is all about personalization and the making. So you get to see the leather goods being made. You get to understand how that works, and also then you can specify that personalization for yourself or for gifting. So that's all about, again, it's about the crafting and demystifying the process, which I think is really important, because customers are genuinely interested in how things are made. And the other, and then also, from a sustainability point of view, and is also experimenting and working with, and has a separate shop that is just about sustainable leather substitute products. And so they're, in part is giving equal precedence in different spaces and with very different product ranges to have 2 separate conversations, but which kind of align with each other as a brand. And I think there's a lot of that brands can learn from, which is understanding that there's a Venn diagram with different customer needs. Some overlap, some are separate, depending on who you're talking to as a group of people or as individuals, and also different products with different needs as well. And that actually, that versatility of being able to communicate across multiple channels and through multiple product groups to your customers is a really important one for creating a luxury experience, and also being able to tailor as closely as possible to your customers' expectations on your brand.
And your customers' needs. And some luxury customers, we read recently about how the latest luxury item for luxury bragging rights in Sussex is a composting loo. And there is one man in Sussex who makes them, and there's a huge waiting list. And this is the thing that's going to make your neighbours sit up and take notice of you effectively, not a holiday, not a bag. So it's all about, I suppose, this spectrum and where customers are on that continuum. And certain luxury brands are really going to need to pay attention to, even more attention than they already are, to environmental and eco concerns, because that is just becoming much more of a factor, I think, in people's buying decisions. There's so much more visibility. There's so much more understanding about it.
Yeah, and I think we could all, we're almost out of time, and we could all, it's almost a jumping off point for a whole other session. But from going back around to thinking about travel and thinking about kind of spending on experience rather than on products, Six Senses as a retreat brand started in 1995, with natural beauty from the beginning, about taking clients to somewhere singularly beautiful, singularly unspoiled.
Yeah.
And building a retreat there, building organic gardens in all of their retreats, and having sustainability and a connection with the local culture as a core part of what those experiences would be like. Now, that was in 95. In 2019, they were bought by IHG, big global hotel brand. And we're now seeing that brand move into urban locations. So Rome and London are the next urban locations to open. So it will be interesting to see how this kind of idyllic beauty, apart from the urban lifestyle,
barefoot luxury,
how that will translate, and how those values will persist or be able to persist in these new contexts. And you're also talking about the Goldeneye Resort in Jamaica,
which I read about in the how to spend it in the FT, or it might have just been the lifestyle and travel pages. And it's all about how it's all about pared back chic. So it's lots of linens and wood, and I'm sure it's all local and sustainable. But yeah, the opposite of sort of shiny, sponsy luxury that, I expect. I've never been, but I expect if you go to Vegas, you still have a certain sort of luxury aesthetic there. And this is obviously moving in a very different direction. It's about evoking a sense of peace, because customers, Goldeneye must have recognized that its customers are looking for, frankly, some peace and quiet from a very busy, very hectic, slightly frantic lifestyle. And what they want is an environment that communicates that to them.
Yeah, and again, it's allowed to lean on its heritage as a brand. It's a singular place, but it was originally in Fleming's house in Jamaica, and it was then bought in the 1970s by Chris Blackwell, who runs Island Records, and he continues to own it. He's owned it for probably 40 years or so, and he has continued to allow it to evolve at quite a slow pace, at quite an organic pace. And so plays on that heritage, and also plays on that slightly kind of, it's clearly not being developed with a master plan and an architect, it's evolved over time. And some of that has created charm. So it's got heritage, charm, and authenticity in spades as a result of that. And I think, these are elements that I think luxury consumers are increasingly going to be looking for, and that brands can continue to be shiny and continue to be bold and continue to be beautiful, of course. But there will be an increasing amount of space for brands to allow their own personality to come out, and for the traditional luxury tropes to be relaxed a bit. Because the exclusivity that comes from understanding the process, that comes from who makes it, how it's made, your ability to tailor that product to your whoever you're gifting it to specifications, will have more meaning than just the quality and the beauty. It will go deeper.
Amazing. Thank you both. I'm going to give everyone a couple of minutes to put their questions in. I have a question. So younger generations are going to become obviously big spenders, or are becoming bigger spenders in the luxury market. How do you think that's going to change the whole landscape?
Well, I think there's an element of there's two things. I'm going to start with one, actually. Sorry, I'm going to go back. So from the Bain and Altagamma report, they actually looked at what 2030 a projection of what 2030 might look like for the luxury market. And I think the most important thing that I took from that is that Gen Z or Gen Z, who are people born between 97 and 2012, will account for 1/3 of luxury purchases by 2030. So these are people who might be in their early 20s or might only be 10 years old right now, but that by in 8 years' time, they will be one of the key market segments from a demographic point of view in terms of luxury purchase. They are also buying their first luxury goods earlier, so between 3 to 5 years earlier than previous generations. Now, I think in part that's to do with brands having improved their digital strategies and also their product ranges. So digital comms and existing in game environments or metaverse environments, as we've seen Gucci and Dior and other brands do, allows them to connect with those consumers where those consumers spend their time, and also allows them to create digital products that can be worn virtually by the avatar in a game that creates an initial connection between the brand and the consumer. They've also done the same thing with physical products, where, as we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years, huge rise of casual wear and trainers has quite naturally also drawn younger consumers in, because there are product groups there that are relevant to them and are relevant to their peers.
Yeah, I'd say that's another thing you noticed actually. There's been a sort of casualization of the luxury consumer in terms of, you know, the idea of someone being smart, being suited and booted, of all, you know, for women, heels, just not the case anymore. And, you know, of course, the other thing, Dan, which I think, you know, you implicitly touched on with your first point, was it's the rise of the mobile phone as a tool from which to administer and run your life. And luxury brands, the savvy ones, have realised that they need to be there in their customers' hands.
Yeah.
And to really have that presence, because that is where their customers are spending rather a lot of their time.
And the other point I wanted to make is actually to come back to the issues around sustainability and businesses that are going to understand the issues that are important to those generations. And I think that one of the and luxury brands really have an opportunity to take the lead here. Firstly, because if you do something that is perhaps has an impact on your product price, but is either more ethically sourced, more ethically manufactured, or is created more closer to home, so there are less air miles, whatever those issues are that you choose to solve as a luxury brand or take on as a luxury brand, if that has a 5% impact on the ticket price of that product, the market is much more likely to bear that with a struggle without even noticing, than if you're a mid-market or a mass market brand where price is incredibly sensitive. So in fact, luxury brands are well placed to solve some of the problems that everybody is affected by at the moment, but which consumers are going to demand change on, and really lead the evolution in the market. So there's going to be challenges, because also luxury brands will attract higher sorry, I've got my point, but I can't say it. Luxury brands will require customers hold them to a higher standard, because I'm spending a lot of money with you. I'm getting a very high quality product from you. So I expect you to understand and listen to my needs as well. It's much less of a transactional, functional purchase.
Considered purchase journey, isn't it? So there are so many more touch points on that journey where the customer is going to have the opportunity to interrogate the brand. And to really understand what it stands for. So
I think, luxury brands their consumers will expect them to listen, but also they're well placed to react to those demands in a way that other brands will find more challenging.
Yeah, and I think that point about the leadership that luxury brands can show is really interesting as well, because even if you're not a customer of a luxury brand, I think what we've noticed today is that luxury exerts a certain pull, even perhaps beyond the customer base. So if you're a purchaser of value groceries, it's unlikely that value grocery brand is necessarily going to appeal to a better off person, because it's just not on their radar. It's not necessary for them. It doesn't really have a particular draw or particular interest. But there is something about luxury that's very appealing. There's something very aspirational. It might be something that one dips in and out of, at Christmas or at birthdays, or 3 times a year, or when it's when you feel like you deserve a treat, you've got a bonus, whatever it is. So there is that kind of constant interest in it. We see that today. We've had more sign-ups for this webinar. Perhaps that's what we should do luxury from now on every time instead of grocery. But I think it's got, because the luxury sector has that wider pull, that wider draw, it's got that influence that goes beyond its regular purchases, and it's an important one, and I think we see it taking it seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I have another question. How has the definition of luxury changed across now till what it's going to be, and how is that going to impact the consumers that we're seeing? Do you have any good examples?
I think it comes back to that point about what is luxury for. If it's effectively some sort of status symbol, then is it a question of luxury being a sort of ever-changing trend? So could one example of luxury I came across actually recently was from a recent magazine that the Times puts out from time to time called Lux, Lux. This big, large format magazine that focuses on the luxury sector. they were talking about, they had an article and they were talking about children's parties and a service that has come onto their radar. And it's a company called Little Eco Eats, and they will supply you with lunch bags for your children's party that you're hosting either at home or at some other venue. And they cost £11 each. They are also, everything's sourced from British suppliers. You can hire reusable plates. They'll provide things like bunting, ethically sourced decorations, the tablecloth, plastic-free party bags as well. So all of the thinking goes into, they'll do all the thinking. They'll take all that away from you, but you know that you're buying an ethically product with good ethical credentials that aligns with your other purchasing decisions in other parts of your life. The packaging materials are plant-based, they're compostable. At the end, you just pack everything back up in a box and it gets collected by a push-bike courier. So that the new kind of luxury that isn't about, it's not about products, it's not even about what one might consider to be a luxury service, but it is something that is aligning with the evolving needs and values of, I suppose, what a luxury consumer is starting to look like, albeit in an area of a purchasing area that might not traditionally have attracted the luxury market because it's just a children's party, right? But actually, when you look at all of the what can be created, all the mess and the unrecyclable stuff that can go around a children's party, actually absolutely makes sense that there's a company that's evolved to answer this need.
And I think what's interesting about that example is that it is, there's a product at its core, but actually the most compelling piece around it is that once the product is at a baseline that suits the target market, it's actually it's the service around it that makes the difference. It's the service that's the compelling part of it.
Yeah.
So the proposition works because of the service, because it's all taken care of for you. That's what really makes the difference there.
Okay, well, we have last question. I'm not going to hold anyone too long. From Jonathan, do you think today's luxury brands lack the level of transparency that current or future consumers demand? Consumers are making decisions based on a brand's values over the above product.
I think, I think it's absolutely. I think I was trying to touch on it when I got tongue-tied earlier on. That's exactly the point I was trying to make, is that I think there needs to be more transparency from all brands at all levels. And the luxury sector, one, has an opportunity to lead because it's less price sensitive, and also because its consumers are very likely to demand more of it because of the nature of the transaction. If I'm spending thousands of pounds with you, I expect your values to have at least a reasonable alignment with mine.
And also in practical terms, when you think about things like traceability, so that luxury brands have historically always said, yes, this leather comes from here and it was ethically sourced, and the people who are making it in the atelier in France or Italy are properly paid, skilled artisans. So there's probably a much shorter supply chain there to sort of worry about and think about. So it's probably easier.
And we can see the brands beginning to probably do more than experiment with blockchain. We know that it's got a lot of already got a lot of use in terms of supply chain and the back of house piece that the customers don't see.
Yeah.
But there's a real opportunity, as there are with many other sectors in the market, to take that forward to transparency, to allow you to track that pair of shoes, that product, that piece of meat you might be buying from your beautiful butcher, and understand exactly where it's come from, and tell the product story. So I see it as a really big opportunity that transparency actually plays into the luxury market's hands,
really, really well.
because all of these things are of interest to the consumers, and the authenticity and the story there is richer as a result of it.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm not going to hold anyone. It's 1:00. Enjoy your lunch breaks. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. If you do have more questions for us, or you want to chat about this, or you just want to pick Dan and Sarah's brain, drop us a line, enquiries@cada.co.uk. I'll be sending out a link to this on our YouTube channel. Also, we now have this in podcast format, which is really fun. So hello to anyone who's listening to it on our podcast later on. And you'll be sure to get the exclusive first invite to the next one. I mean, it's free, so the exclusivity is like next to nothing. But there's a little excitement of getting it 2 days before everybody else. But thank you, everybody. And I wish you a happy rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Guys. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.